Alright, welcome to the second episode of I Love Awful Things. Today we're reviewing Pagemaster. It's a little movie starring Macaulay Culkin and Christopher Lloyd, with supporting actors of Whoopi Goldberg and Patrick Stewart and Frank Welker. An amazing all-star cast. But this has horrible reviews on Rotten Tomatoes.
Not just the professional reviews that are always bad, it's the audience reviews that all just get horrible reviews, 1 to 2 stars and everything. People saying it's a drag.
Yeah, this is a movie that I thought we wouldn't review on this channel because I just assumed everybody loved it. Turns out that people hate it just as much as they hate Never Cry Werewolf and Glenn or Glenda by Ed Wood. So it stars Macaulay Culkin. He plays a character whose name I do not remember.
Richard Tyler.
Steven Tyler. And he is scared of everything. Absolutely terrified. He has a fire extinguisher, and in case of emergency, break glass. He has a pair of boots in case there's broken glass. He reads all the statistics about everything. He is super terrified.
Everything in life, there is a statistic that he has that holds him back in life because
everything is dangerous, according to him. Just everything. His bike is super safe,
right,
which I love. It has headlights, a windshield, tail lights, turn signals. It is the best bike ever.
Oh, it's amazing.
To spoil the end a little bit, when he's over his fears and he jumps over the ramp, all the stuff falls off, and you're like, his bike is ruined now.
Yeah.
All his flashy stuff. Like, if I had that bike when I was a kid, and people wouldn't call me a nerd for that, it would be like,
Can I have a ride?
Look at Mr. Big Shot. His bike has turn signals and a little customized license plate. His father is building him a treehouse in a tree the father knows his son won't climb. This is a bad idea. You're putting forth all this effort when you know going into it is going to be useless. If the son never asks for a treehouse, he's not even brave enough to climb the ladder. There's a pulley system on the treehouse.
I liked the way the father kept trying for his son.
I'm just saying that maybe step 1 shouldn't be building the treehouse. Step 1 should be getting him up the tree.
Right. Just building a treehouse is going way too far into something.
A big step. So he has to go to the store to get screws because his father's out, so he's taking that awesome bike.
Yeah.
And he crashes on the way there during that big storm, and he gets up and he immediately says, no cranial damage.
Right, because that's something a 10-year-old would say.
Well, a 10-year-old who was scared of everything, maybe. He hides in the library from the storm, and
gets shelter.
Christopher Lloyd comes out, and he's a very majestic being. He walks in, makes his presence known. He's very, welcome to the library, my boy.
Right.
What do you want? Fantasy? Horror? Adventure? I have a knack for knowing what people need. And he doesn't. Well, he does, but he doesn't, because that's clearly not what the kid was there for. So he forces him to give him a library card. But he says library.
Welcome to the library.
Christopher Lloyd built a time machine out of a DeLorean. Says library.
And that bothers you?
It bothers me greatly. If I had to pick one thing about this movie that I don't like, it's that.
It's becoming a trend that you pick one thing out of the movies that you love.
Yeah. Well, actually, that's not really it. There is something later. Christopher Lloyd refers to fiction as the wonderful, quite unpredictable world of books. The nerdy kid doesn't have a library card. That's something that bothered me as well about this movie.
Something that you mentioned, that he must read medical magazines or something to get all these statistics and understand everything about what could be wrong.
Clearly he's never been to the library. He didn't even know it was there.
Yeah, he acted like he didn't know what a library card was.
The ceiling foreshadows the whole movie when you see that big ceiling painting, and it is glorious. Like, everything about that painting is wonderful. I wish my ceiling looked like that. The paint drips from the ceiling as if it starts out as a drip in the background, as if the ceiling's leaking. Then you notice it's paint, and the paint just starts falling faster and faster until Rich is actively being chased by a flood of paint.
Right.
that finally splashes on him, and he says, I'm a cartoon, because suddenly everything is animated. And Chris Lloyd comes out, and now he's the Pagemaster. He goes, "No, my boy, you're an illustration," which is great. You meet the books before anything really happens after that.
All 3 tests that he had to go through that Christopher Lloyd told him.
Horror, fantasy, and adventure. Adventure is voiced by an unrecognizable Patrick Stewart.
Yeah.
Patrick Stewart, I had no idea he was such a talented voice actor until I saw this film.
When I was watching it, I forgot he was even Adventure.
I made it a point to remember that. There's only one line. I can't remember what the line is, but there's only one line where you can totally tell. The eye patch that Adventure has.
He doesn't need it.
Entirely unnecessary. He has both his eyes. The first test that they do is horror. I wish it was the last one, because it is the best part of the whole movie.
Is this your one thing?
Yeah, if I could change one thing about this movie, I'd put horror at the end. We are introduced to the character of Dr. Jekyll, voiced by the late, great Leonard Nimoy. Yeah, I believe he voices both Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and it is wonderful. You eat up every moment of that scene. It is great. Dr. Jekyll hands a martini to... It honestly looks like an appletini. He hands it to Adventure. And Horror comes up and he's like, I want to try, give me the olive. And Adventure just goes, "This is a man's drink." And it is the girliest looking thing ever. But Horror knocks it out of his hand. And
It eats away the floor.
It eats away the floor. And then they're going to stop Dr. Jekyll from drinking his. But they're too late and he turns into Mr. Hyde.
And that's pretty good attention to
detail. It's just wonderful. Then they're trying to escape the madhouse, as it were.
Yeah.
And there's ghosts and like flying books, and everything's just terrifying and great. And it's a grand adventure. But speaking of horror, because this is his world, he is the closest of the 3 books to Rich.
He's afraid of everything.
He's afraid of everything, even though he is a horror novel. He is scared of everything. When he first meets Rich, Rich is startled. He apologizes profusely for his appearance.
I scared you. I'm sorry.
And it almost made me tear up.
Right.
Like I was very close to tearing up.
He's afraid of the fact that he scares people.
He doesn't like horror. Let me see if I can find the quote, because the quote is extremely sad. Horror is afraid of himself, because horror always has sad endings.
Horror always has sad endings.
That was so sad. Oh man, I was tearing up. Like that amount of, he just doesn't like who he is because of the content of his pages.
Right. And how he looks.
He's just a sweetheart. So Adventure comes in and he is a pirate. He is always ready for action. No more so than when we meet Captain Ahab, who is full on for the hunt of Moby Dick. He is after this whale and he is close. In fact, it's the first thing that Rich really notices about the world of adventure, because the white whale up and knocks them right out of their boat, leaves them for dead. They're just floating around out there. Actually, the quote when Adventure sees Captain Ahab, "Crazy, he's insane. He's my kind of guy." And then they're floating out, they're going to get eaten by sharks. And at this point, Rich went and found Adventure in the water, but Adventure was unable to save fantasy and horror.
Yeah, and he's so sad.
And you get a feel of death in this,
Right.
like you wouldn't believe. It is sad.
I searched for them much as I could, mate. I'm afraid they've gone below with Davy Jones.
No, it can't be.
Like Rich is coming to terms with the fact that his friends are gone and he may never see them again. But then Long John Silver sweeps them all up, and sweeps up Rich and Adventure, and they're going to Treasure Island. And when they get there, Kevin McAllister is now a slave.
Right.
And he's been home alone for far too long. No, Rich is a slave, and they're looking for the treasure on Treasure Island. There's this
Yes.
great thing where it's like, the skeletons are laid out with their hands over their heads, and one of the crew members points out that that's not a natural way for someone to die,
Right.
and they must be cursed, and they need to get off the island. But then they realize that that's the hands are pointing towards the treasure, and it's terrifying. Like, these skeletons have amazing detail.
Yeah.
And this is a G-rated film. And then you hear some ghostly voices, like the island is haunted, and most of the crew runs off. And Kevin holds up... I said Kevin again. Rich holds up Long John Silver with a sword and forces him off the island. And you find out the ghostly voices were fantasy and horror.
Yeah.
And it's a great reunion, and boy did I see it coming.
Yeah, because they haven't even made it through fantasy, which is one of the trials, so how are they going to get rid of the character fantasy before?
Oh yeah. And then you get to fantasy. And there are some cool effects. There is a cool dancing lightning fairy.
Yeah,
It's absolutely wonderful.
it's made out of lightning.
And everything's visually beautiful. And a song takes you through most of it until you get to the dragon. The dragon is terrifying.
It's kind of it's just a regular dragon that's in
Everything.
everything.
But, of course they're gonna have it. And Rich and the books get separated. And Rich is almost to the exit of the library. He's almost done with this whole crazy adventure.
And then
But
there's
he
that
notices the
skeleton.
books aren't with him. So he has to grab a sword and a helmet and a shield from this skeleton. And he takes the helmet off, and what happens?
You can tell how this adventurer died because his skull was smashed in it.
And he takes the helmet off, and the rest of the skull just crumbles.
Right.
And it is absolutely morbid.
Yeah.
It is terrifying for a kid's film.
Like the helmet was the last thing holding the skull together.
But he defeats the dragon and gets out of the library, only to find out, surprise, surprise, he had just knocked himself out. But for some reason, the 3 books are there. And they're old, and they're leathery, and they're rugged. Christopher Lloyd comes in, helps him pick up the books, and Rich had made a promise to each of the books that he'd check them out.
Yeah.
And so he tries to check them out. Christopher Lloyd informs him, "You can only check out 2 books." And
Yeah.
he's nearing tears and begs for an exception. And, of course, he gets to check out all 3 books. And then he goes home and just goes up into the treehouse, reads the book by lantern light, and his parents have been searching for him this whole time, but they get there and decide that the whole time he's been home alone in his treehouse. And his dad goes up and shuts the lantern off, kisses him on
Which
the
is a good
forehead,
idea to shut the lantern off.
and then goes into the house, and the credits are about to roll. And then horror says, "It's dark, I'm scared." And then fantasy turns the lantern back on, horrible idea. And then you see the shadows on the wall, and then it's zooming out. You've got the exterior view of the treehouse, and Adventure, who has been flirting with fantasy the whole time, goes, "How about we end this story with a kiss?" And horror just pipes in and goes, "Okay," and kisses Adventure. He's like, "I meant from her." And it was absolutely wonderful. So, with that, I guess my rating would be an 11 out of 10 on this one. I absolutely love this movie.
That's not a real rating. Come on.
It's a real rating for me. You gotta realize I like the most awful movies, and this one's actually good.
Well, my rating is a 7.5 out of 10. A 75%. I think that's a fair rating for a good movie.
Why do you live here? Just one more little bit.
I don't know. This is my opinion. It's not your opinion.
We're trailing off here. Okay, this movie's great. I would fully recommend it. I give it an 11 out of 10. Tim gives it 8 out of 10. No arguments. I guess that does it for this episode.
Yeah.
I believe next week's film will be Mystery Team, unless it's wildly inappropriate. I feel like saying that now.
This is Tim O'Dell,
And this is Mike Odell.
signing off.
I meant from her!
Why do you live here?